my name is Chasey, and you're watching my technology book report.
So I did my technology book report on the book Pay It Forward by Catherine Ryan Hyde. The original book was published in 1999 as an adult novel, but I read the young adult version, which was published in 2014. So the book never names a specific town or place where it takes, except for towards the end of the book, where it takes place in Washington, D.C. But we do know for most of the book the story takes place in a small Californian town in the early 1990s. So our story starts out with Trevor, our main character, is studying 7th grade in the beginning of this book and meets Ruben, his facially scarred social studies teacher. Ruben then assigns an extra credit project to think of an idea for world change and put it into action. Trevor decides to take up the challenge and creates the idea of Pay It Forward to change the world. Then we are introduced to Arlene, Trevor's single mom, who soon meets Jerry, Trevor's first person to help. She meets him when Trevor takes him home to have him take a shower, and Arlene sees him. Arlene freaks out and goes to meet Ruben, but only comes to the realization that Trevor should have been the one to tell her those things about the Pay It Forward movement and why Jerry was in her house. After Arlene sends Jerry out of her house, Trevor decides to try and make Ruben get together with Arlene as part of his project. He does this by subtle hints and not so subtle hints. He even goes as far as to invite his teacher out for dinner under the excuse of a parent-teacher conference. He also, not so subtly, asks his mom if she would like to get married again. At this point, Trevor is discouraged. Jerry is gone to jail, and Ruben says we can't orchestrate love. But he hasn't given up yet, and decides to go for Mrs. Greenberg. Mrs. Greenberg, as you know, is a widow. But long story short, Trevor helps fix up her garden and talks with her. Trevor later finds out that Mrs. Greenberg passed away, and he thinks he's failed the project completely and meets Ruben to tell him about his failed project. After telling Ruben, Arlene decides to drive her car over to drive her up. Arlene decides to ask Ruben out for dinner, but at the last second changes her mind and makes Ruben ask her out for a movie. Don't ask how that works. Then the perspective switches to Matt, who has just received a third of Mrs. Greenberg's $25,000 life insurance as her way of paying it forward, $8,333. He buys a new motorcycle and picks up some college class pamphlets. After that, Trevor goes to school, and the 4 people that actually did the assignment share what they did, but many people laugh at Trevor because his movement relies on the idea of the honor system to keep the Pay It Forward movement alive. Then Arlene decides to go to Ruben's house and asks why he hasn't called since the movie, and ends up talking with him and helping him unpack his moving boxes. Ruben decides he loves Arlene and wants to be with her. That escalated quickly. Before the next time they meet, Ruben buys a ring to give to her, but can't muster up the courage to give it. That escalated really quickly. Arlene knows that he has something to say, so she assumes that he wants to break up. However, they clear things up, and all is good, and also they're engaged now because that's what he wanted to do in the first place. During this time, Matt is thinking about how he should pay it forward when he sees a man hurt and bleeding in the alley outside of his house. He decides to try and pay it forward, so he takes him home, gives him some coffee, patches up his wounds, and tries to convince him to go to the hospital. But after many refusals from the man, he realizes that the man is a criminal and probably should not be trusted. So he tells him to leave without paying it forward. Then the story switches back to Ruben's point of view, where Trevor and Arlene are accepting Ruben into his family as his new dad and bonding. By now it is October, whereas in the beginning of the book it was January, and Ruben has been fully accepted into the family when Ricky, Arlene's ex-husband, comes back to the surprise of many. Arlene and Ruben break up, so Arlene can try to patch things up with Ricky, as he is Trevor's biological father. Ricky comes back with no intentions of getting a job or doing any housework like washing dishes or even washing his own dirty clothes. Arlene realizes she's made a mistake and asks Trevor if Ruben ever is curious about her. He responds no and says that she should try and fix the mistake. Arlene's not sure she can, but is fed up with Ricky and kicks him out. While this whole thing is happening, crime rates in the town have dropped by 80% thanks to Sidney G., the criminal that Matt helped out. A freelance reporter named Chris reports a story on it, with Sidney claiming to have made the whole thing up, and quickly gains attention from Matt, the real person who helped Sidney out. Matt sends a letter to Chris, giving Mrs. Greenberg's name and address, so Chris travels there to meet Richard, who's keeping up his own garden since her death. And Richard tells Chris about some paper boy who helped fix up her garden. Chris also meets a lady at the cat shelter in Terry. While debating how he should find more information on Miss Greenberg, he stumbles on Trevor, who's trimming hedges. Chris thinks nothing of it and doesn't even suspect him when Trevor tells him about a school project that he helped her for. At this point, Trevor thinks the whole project was a failure anyway, even if Miss Greenberg did pay it forward. Then Trevor goes to meet Ruben, which he doesn't do much anymore because Trevor reminds Ruben of the heartbreak with Arlene. Ruben drives Trevor home, and Trevor tries to convince Ruben to give a second chance to Arlene. However, just when Ruben is driving away, Arlene runs out and calls his name. He turns a corner. Later, while Trevor is at a friend's house, Arlene visits Ruben and confesses to him, saying that she loves him. Ruben tells her to go home, in tears. Now in Chris's point of view, he discovers the missing link in Trevor. When he meets Trevor at his school, he tells him about how it really did make a difference. The scene switches to Arlene and Trevor sitting in their house, waiting for the program with Trevor on the news. They can't believe the newfound fame they have and find out that Trevor has been invited to the White House to meet the president with Ruben. During the entire flight, Trevor chose to sit in the window seat, leaving Arlene and Ruben in an awkward silence. When they arrive, a tour guide asks Trevor what he wants to see first. He says the Vietnam Memorial, knowing full well that Ruben is a veteran. At the memorial, the guide leads Ruben off to a secluded part of the memorial where the names of the veterans died are carved. There, Ruben confesses how he had his face scarred to Trevor and Arlene. After confessing, he proposes to Arlene with a ring he's kept in his pocket the whole time. Then we switch to a new point of view, Gordy's. He sees his coworker being attacked and sees a man walking towards him. And he thinks he's about to get beat to a pulp. He knows it's his turn and closes his eyes. Meanwhile, Trevor is inside the car, unaware until he sees the scene while driving by. He opens the door, rushes out with Ruben behind him, and Trevor body slams the attacker, but gets stabbed in the process. With Trevor in the hospital and Arlene and Ruben blaming themselves, Chris convinces Arlene to say something to the public as they are confused and begging for answers. Arlene asks for a vigil in front of the city hall tomorrow night. When it comes by, Arlene tries to drive through the heavy traffic to get to the city hall, but she realizes the heavy traffic was caused by the thousands of people that came to the vigil when she gets out the car. Arlene also receives a letter from Jerry saying that he paid it forward by convincing someone to not jump off a bridge. He's still homeless, but he couldn't have done it if he wasn't. At the vigil, Chris finds out there are people for Trevor from Bangladesh, Illinois, Florida, Sweden, San Francisco, and many more. Ruben, after a short speech from Arlene and a little speech after Ruben, he steps up to the mic and says, "If Trevor touched your life, then maybe you need to pay it forward." After concluding the speech, Chris realizes that everyone at the vigil has brought a candle, and as Ruben and Arlene walk through the crowd, everyone vows they will pay it forward. The book comes to an end.